Hello, everybody. This is Matt Wilhelm here in Livingston, Montana at Dan Bailey's, owner of Yellowstone Fly Fishing School. And we're going to tie a sparkle dun today. I'm going to tie it in a March Brown pattern. And here in Livingston on the Yellowstone and a lot of our local rivers, the Boulder, the Shields, the Stillwater, we get a March Brown hatch. Usually, depending on weather, middle of April, to the end of April into early May. If we have a warm spring, sometimes they'll come off earlier, but don't let the name March Brown fool you. Very seldomly will you see these insects in March on our local rivers here around Livingston. And so this sparkle dun we're going to tie today is a great imitation for the March Brown. Also keep in mind that at the same time of year, and even a little bit earlier in April and late March, we get the blue-winged olives. And you can tie the same fly on a smaller hook, like a size 18, to imitate the blue-winged olive. You would just have to change your thread color to an olive thread. You'd have to change your body color to kind of a dusty olive type of dubbing material, but everything else would be the same. So for the March Brown, let's start out with our materials. We're going to use some 6/0 thread, and I'm going to go with kind of a brown color. We'll be using elk hair for the wing, and we'll be using a dubbing that is like a hare's ear colored dubbing, kind of a brownish colored dubbing for the body, and then the tail material is going to be Antron yarn. All right, so let me get a hook and we'll get started. Using a size 12 dry fly hook today, but these insects are more along the lines of a 14. You can maybe get by with a 12, but 14s are kind of the general size of this insect. And I'm going to start with a thread base, and I'm going to go about halfway and then come back to where I'm going to attach my elk hair wing. I'm going to leave my thread hanging down, maybe about 2 or 3 eye widths back from the eye. And, when I have my fly tying students or people ask me, Matt, how much elk hair when you make a wing for an elk hair caddis or for a sparkle dun like this, how much hair do you usually choose? And usually what I do is I like to use the rule of thumb of about the gap of the hook. And I intentionally cut too much off just to show you this. As you can see maybe on camera there, this is too much hair. And what's going to happen here if you tie on too much hair, it'll start to rotate around the hook and your wing won't look very good. So I'm going to get rid of a little bit of this hair here. Now, I took about a third of that away. And so now you can see that I've got about a gap's worth of hair between my fingers. Another thing to keep in mind with elk hair, deer hair, there's under fur. It's kind of fuzzy, insulating layer. And you want to get that under fur out of there because it'll absorb water and sink your fly a little bit quicker. So I'm going to put this elk hair in here, tips down into a hair stacker. I might actually add just a few more of those hairs that I deleted. I think I might have taken a few too many away. I'm just going to put a couple more in there. And I'm going to tap this on the table. And I'm going to pull this tool apart so my tips are facing forward. So there, all my tips are even on that elk hair by using that hair stacker. The length of the wing, you want it to be about half the length no more than half the length of your hook. So I'm going to put about that much above my fingers right there, a little bit more than half the length. And what I'm going to do is when you tie in elk hair, deer hair, you want to come around with just enough tension on the thread to keep it in contact with the hair. You don't want to start adding pressure here because the hair will rotate around the hook. You want to come around with a soft wrap and apply pressure to the thread straight back towards your chest, and you'll see those hairs start to flare out. when you're working with elk hair and deer hair, I like to work. I'm working right within the breaking point of my thread, and sometimes I break my thread when I do this, but I'm putting a fair amount of pressure on that 6/0 thread. I put about 5 wraps in the same groove. Now I'm going to go over those butts just a little bit and tie them down a little bit more to really secure them to the hook. All right. Then I'm going to take my scissors. I'm going to cut these butts off pretty clean. Like that. And a couple stragglers, we'll get rid of those. And then, get that last one out of there. Then I'm going to take my thread, I'm going to run it through those butts a little bit to really bind them down to the hook and add more so that hair stays on there just a little bit better. All right, now I'm going to work my thread down to the curve. And I'm going to get rid of a few of these little devils that are just kind of hanging out there. The dubbing will cover that. Probably wouldn't have to do this, but I'm going to anyway. So the next thing I'm going to use is the poly yarn. Now, one thing I've done already with a piece of poly yarn is I have the thickness of the whole piece of poly yarn is too much, I think. And so what I've done is I've divided this in half. I think that the whole chunk that comes off of the card is a little bit thick. So I've divided this in half, and I'm going to use half that diameter. And I'm going to lay this, I'm going to even these tips up. And I'm going to put a little bit above my fingers. Now, one thing that a fly tyer taught me years ago is if you're right-handed and if you spin the bobbin counterclockwise, when you go to tie your material in, when you relax the thread, that thread will lay right against your fingers and makes tying materials on really easy, especially if you have big fingers. And I'm going to work this thread forward over top of this Antron yarn so I keep my body diameter consistent. Then I'm going to bring it back to the curve where I started. And I'm going to get rid of whatever's left over up here. And I'm going to shorten my tail to just a little bit longer than the hook gap. So another thing that this Antron imitates is kind of the trailing shuck of the insect as they shed their exoskeleton when they come out. That's the reason we don't use moose mane for this or some other type of fibettes or tailing material. This Antron yarn works really well, kind of imitates that exoskeleton being shed off of the fly as it emerges from a nymph into an adult. Now for my dubbing, I've got an assortment of Orvis dubbing here, and I'm going to go with the hair zero color. This is a really good color. These insects on their underbody are kind of a tan, kind of a light brown color. The backs tend to be darker, but what the fish sees is what's underneath. And so you want to match that belly color, and the bellies are kind of this tan. So I'm going to put some dubbing on here now. And I'm going to dub a real thin body using little bits of this hair at a time, really thin. And the reason I want this really thin is I already have a pretty decent amount of bulk right here from tying down my Antron, and then I've got some bulk up here from where I tied down my elk hair. And if I have too much dubbing on when I get up here to the thorax, it's going to be really big. So I'm going with a really thin layer of dubbing right here on this. Real thin, real tight on the thread. And we'll see how far that gets us. I might have to add more. We'll wait and see. So I've got a little bit of thread I've got to use up right here before my dubbing catches up, and I'll just spin that in the same place. And here comes my dubbing. And I'm going to start working that thin layer forward. And now we're going to be going over the thorax and behind the wing. And I do need to add a little bit more. And some of you who are watching this video might say, wow, that wing is facing forward. You know, that doesn't look like a mayfly wing. Well, what's going to happen is when I'm going to go in front of that wing with more dubbing, and that dubbing layer in front of that wing will help it to stand, that wing to stand up. So I added a little bit more dubbing right there, real tight on the thread again. And I'm going to lift this wing up and back. And then as soon as you throw some dubbing right in front of that wing. It'll help that wing to stand up. And I'm going to bring it behind the wing again. And then I'm going to bring it in front. And then work my way over that toward the eye. And whip finish the fly, and it's pretty much finished. So that dubbing, when you bring that dubbing in front of the wing, you better go around one more time with that thread. Here we go. It'll help that wing to stand up. Get my tool to work here. And then a little bit more work with the wing. I'm just going to fan it out so it's like kind of goes halfway around the fly. And maybe what I'll do here is I'll turn the vise so you can see that what I did is I fanned the hair out like that. This is a very visible fly. It sits really, really low in the water, and it's an easy fly to tie and works really well. And you can, in any mayfly pattern, you can tie a sparkle dun, whether it's a size 12 or 14 for the March Brown, or whether it's a size 12 or 10 for a green drake, or whether it's a size 18 for a Baetis or a blue-winged olive, or for a calabaetis on the lake. This is a great fly, easy to tie, and best of all, it works. So that's the sparkle dun.